436, chapters 49 and 50 of The Count of Monte Cristo. Book talk begins at 10:19.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. 436, Merry Brightness. This episode of CraftLit is brought to you by its listeners. Many thanks and much gratefulness to all of the listeners who have gone over to patreon.com/craftlit and pledged their support to the show. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you. Well, hello, and happy almost end of 2016. How did this happen? I blinked and a year went away. I have no idea how this happened. I hope your year has gone well now that we're suddenly at the end of it. And I hope you enjoy our two chapters that we have today, because to end on a happy note, I thought it would be good to do the two for you. Before we get to the chapter, though, I do actually have some craftiness for you. This is from Erica and from me, as we were talking about creative things to do for the holidays, especially for children, but for families too. So first you will hear Erica, and then you'll hear me. Here we go. All right, you go.
Okay, so I made a list of making memories instead of buying stuff. So some of these ideas do cost money, but
that's okay.
With the idea of you're investing in experiences, you're investing in making memories instead of cluttering up your house with junk. So one is, and these in no particular order, just the way that they came up was tickets to a movie that they want to go to see.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go to a theater a little farther away than normal, you get extra time with them. Plan a family zoo day.
Nice.
If you're into zoos. I know some people don't do zoos. Museum tickets. You guys, if the parents have been busy lately, you could do a coupon for each kid to have a day or afternoon of one-on-one time with the parent who's been working a lot and not around as much.
Right.
Doing something that the kid likes to do. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
Something the kid likes to do. If you live easily drivable from snow, you could plan a family snow day. You could do a coupon for a movie marathon day where the kid picks the movies and the day's menu and everybody stays in pajamas or sweats all day. You could set, if you have multiple kids, you could set each kid loose in the dollar store with $5 or $10 to put together a gift for their sibling. Or you could do it for a neighbor. Like you guys could all, if you guys have a neighbor you guys want to do something nice for, each kid could get a certain amount of money and they could chip in together to build this nice gift for somebody. One thing that's the kind of thing that my Abby would love is a coupon for a whole day spent painting and rearranging the kid's room. You could give an empty recipe binder and spend an afternoon together finding and printing recipes to put inside.
What a great idea.
You could have a device-free puzzle day or a device-free game day,
Mm-hmm.
both of which are good if there's a rainy or snowy day, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could do a coupon for the family to go for breakfast or brunch to someplace local, whether it's Starbucks or IHOP or some schmancy place, but everybody all goes in pajamas together to go out.
That's fun.
I've done that with my daughters and one of their friends one time. It was fun. And then they got too old for it to be cool, and now they're old enough that it might be cool again. If you have a kid who's really social, a coupon to host a movie marathon day for their friends, including snacks and blanket forts and whatever craziness comes with having those friends over.
Mm-hmm.
We did that one day, and there was much hilarity ensuing. A coupon for an afternoon with a parent spent doing X thing that the kid is always bugging the parent to do, but the parent always resists because
Right.
the parent doesn't enjoy whatever that thing is.
Right.
They can finally get to go do this thing with mom or dad that mom or dad just doesn't want to do. if your kid's a crafter, a coupon for an afternoon spent working together on their chosen craft, or registration for a class or workshop you could take together. Or if your social kid has been wanting to plan some kind of outing with their friends, offering to be parent taxi to make it happen. You know, especially if it's inconvenient for you.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Older kids, that means something. They, you know, you drop your plans for a day to ferry them around to do this stuff that's totally not your thing. If your kid is older, and especially if their love language is acts of service, pay a bill for them. If you normally make them pay for their own ticket when you guys go out for the movies, you pay for their ticket one time.
Right.
Or if they are paying you back for something, excusing a debt, or letting them skip a payment. My father-in-law did that for Andrew. His first birthday while we were married, Andrew had been paying diligently month by month, paying him back for the money to buy his motorcycle. And on his birthday, he only had a couple of payments left. And his dad excused the rest of the debt for his birthday. He said, don't worry about paying me back the rest of the debt.
That's nice.
It also came with instructions for us to go buy a TV. And or you could do a coupon for a day trip someplace they've been wanting to go. Again, it's the time to spend the day, you know, doing fun stuff. Or again, if money's not the issue, you just want to do something that's not buying stuff. If you can afford it, a coupon for an overnight getaway, one-on-one with the parent.
Right.
You know, definitely that could be fun, making memories. Go stay overnight in a hotel and do whatever would be fun for you guys, whether it's, you know, staying up late watching stupid movies in the hotel room and then getting room service breakfast. I mean, whatever would be fun for you guys. That could be really a special thing. And obviously there's bigger things that take more planning, like, okay, this year, instead of buying presents for the family, we're going to take a trip. But those things take more planning than the 12 days we have left before Christmas.
We started talking about things you could do for kids that weren't so much buying them a thing as much as an experience, or at least something that was interactive. And I've talked about this before. I found one, and Erica, I know you found, you had some other ideas that were experiential. I found the website, so I thought I would show everybody. So this is kiva.org. And I know some of you already know about it. This is a website where you can put any amount of money that you want into your quote-unquote bank, and then you could take that money and you choose who you want to invest in. And so let me show you what the investment side of things looks like. So here is my account. I have $25 in outstanding loans right now. That means that my $25, I decided who I wanted to invest in. And I did this yesterday, so they haven't started paying it back. But you can see the two people who I invested in before, they repaid. And sometimes there's a currency loss, which isn't their fault. That's because the translation rate going between one country and another, it went wonky. But when it says there was a currency loss, you can see $250 over time is what I lost on that one. I didn't find that to be a particularly big problem. The one woman on the far right, it says Mary Jane Transportation Philippines. What she was doing was starting her own, kind of like a rickshaw service, except it's not. It was a bicycle cab company. But in order to have enough cabs to make it financially viable for the women that she was building the company for, she needed to have money up front to be able to buy the bicycles. And so that was what the money went towards. And, you know, for some people in some countries, the amount of money that they're asking us for sounds like very little, but to them, it's enormous. So, or it doesn't take very much to make a huge impact in somebody's life. And so this is kind of the crowdfunding microloan idea, and it's genius. So right now I'm working on a guy in Nigeria. I invested in him. He's working on financially solidifying the primary and secondary school where his kids go, and a lot of his neighborhood kids go, because not surprisingly, they're missing a lot of supplies. And right now, their schools function as private schools. So if you can't pay to get into the school, you can't go. And so the other thing he's trying to do is not just get the supplies, but get kind of an endowment going so that they can offset the amount that kids would have to pay to go learn how to read. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I've decided I'm going to give the kids, they're each going to get their own account, and with their account, they're going to show up and there will be $25 there for them to decide how they want to disperse it. And you can do, pieces to more than one place, but then they'll be able to tune in and see how their person's doing. I wanted there to be that interactivity thing going. All right, so that's our PSA for things you can do for the holidays that don't include giving people stuff, aside from, of course, knitted, crocheted, or handmade goods of any sort. That's different, but you already knew that. And if you watch the Crafty Chat this week, you already know what I am about to apologize for here now, which is Justin, my awesome audio editor, rescued our audio last week because my computer died a tragic death, and it went in kind of a spectacular snowballing kind of way, where one hard drive took out the next hard drive, which took out the graphics card, which meant I could function on the computer if I used the blind assistive controls on the keyboard, but I couldn't actually accomplish anything or find anything because I couldn't remember where it was. It was sad. Apparently, though, this is a thing. It's still under warranty because I bought the Apple Care Protection Plan. Thank goodness. That was an inspired moment for me. And they are fixing it. But that means I am currently on cobbled together machinery. I have no idea how this sounds. I'm hoping Justin can rescue it again. Thank you, Justin. And by the time I talk to you again in 2017, everything should be back together and working not just well, but better than ever. So I'm looking forward to that in the new year. It would be nice not to have to spend hours and hours and hours on computer stupid stuff. However, the stuff that isn't stupid right now is the Count of Monte Cristo. It feels like today's chapters, well, at least the first one of our 2 chapters, was a chapter written for the ladies, because there is a huge chunk of today that is just describing fashion. And it's kind of fun. And you can also tell that Dumas liked looking at women because he has a pretty expansive range of adjectives and details that he's able to draw on in creating this picture for us. Because if you recall last week, we ended with the Count saying that he was going to go and visit ID. Her name is spelled Haydee, ID. And it's one of those things where she's been this mysterious, gorgeous woman who we kind of almost know something about, but not really entirely. And that isn't going to change a whole lot today, except that her relationship for now with our Count is almost as mysterious as his relationship with Ali. Because his past as the Count is so shrouded in mystery. It's the 10 years that he spent prepping for right now, because we know so little of that. So many of the places or people or things that came out of that 10 years, they're still going to be mysterious to us, at least for a while longer. And that's part of the serialized nature of the story, right? Because that's how Dumas keeps people coming back and reading more. It's very much like the old TV show Lost. You have to keep one of those things or a few of those things hanging out there as long-term mysteries, as long as it's a good mystery, because that'll keep stringing people along, even through the slower chapters. And we know there have been some slow ones, but we're picking up now. Now, the other thing is we hear a little bit of a travelogue today as well, and that makes a lot of sense because Dumas liked to travel. I'm not sure that he had gone to all of the places that he mentions, but he was not unfamiliar with what he was speaking of. That is something up with which we shall not put. Terminology. There's only a couple. One is a nargile, Nargile. That is a Turkish water pipe, or you might think of a hookah or hookah pipe. That is indeed what a nargile is. It's a water pipe. There is, from what I read, no actual proof that the water filters any of the toxins of tobacco out of the smoke. What it does do, though, is it cools the smoke down, so you wouldn't necessarily have such have quite such a bad coughing fit if you smoked off a hookah pipe for the first time. You will still inhale things that are bad for you. Be that as it may, it's really cool looking. And so I think there's at least half of it is another fashion statement, because you've got those long tubes, which means you can kind of gracefully sclade across a fainting couch and look all mysterious. And some of this, I'm sure, is the orientalization of the East by the West, which has happened for a very long time since we made contact. This is something that you'll notice happens a lot in, well, pretty much anything written in the West pre-1989, and some even after that, where Asian women or South Asian women are described as being exotic or mysterious. And it's just by dint of how their physical look is being perceived by Western, usually men. And it's kind of interesting because it isn't necessarily a diminutive. It's not like you're saying sweetie, honey, baby, sweetie, honey, baby. And it's not as toxic as, I remember Ev Meekum, who was briefly the governor of Arizona. If you're old enough to remember, this was when Martin Luther King Day was being voted on. And not only was he anti-Martin Luther King Day, but he went out in the press saying all sorts of outrageous things. There was something like an 8th grade education was good enough for me, so it's good enough for any woman, that kind of thing. He also said, he got in trouble for using the term pickaninny, which is not something that people in the North generally hear, and it's not something that you hear very often anywhere in the United States. It was a not so nice way to reference African American children in the South, especially during and after slavery. He claimed that that was a term of endearment, which my initial reaction to back at the time was, wow, I don't want to be endeared by you ever, number one. And number two, he didn't sound like he was lying or trying to cover for anything. He sounded absolutely surprised that anyone would be critical of him using that term. And I think that's one of the places where the orientalization of Asian women, Eastern women, women in the Mediterranean, women in the Middle East, women in the South Asian region, and men too, but specifically right now women, where they weren't necessarily being spoken of as a diminutive to diminish their adulthood or their personhood. Instead, by pushing this almost mystic overlay on top of them, you make them even more of an other, capital O other. And if you do that, then you don't have to think of them or treat them like a complete person. They almost become a cipher or a mystical being, something that's untouchable and unseeable, and therefore you can do or say pretty much anything. It's obviously not as bad as demonizing an entire population, but it does create ripple effects that tint people's perspectives. I know there have been some guys on The Daily Show. Recently, there was a new guy. He's Chinese. He still speaks with an accent. He did this great thing before the election where he went down to Chinatown and interviewed a bunch of people. He was angry, but he was funny angry because he was interviewing Chinese Americans, older ones who didn't speak much in the way of English, but who were very, very up on what was going on in the election. And he spoke to them in Chinese, and then he translated for the camera. And he went from person to person. I think he probably talked to, 6 or 8 different people. The last few people who I'd say were under the age of 50, they spoke to him initially in Chinese. And then they started to answer him in English, unaccented English. These are people who were born here, lived their whole lives here, might have visited China or might not have, but spoke Chinese. And at some point, he made a crack about the stereotype that Asian men can't be funny because you can't be mysterious and funny at the same time. Mysterious and funny are a weird combination. So that's a long way of saying ID in this chapter is definitely presented at the beginning as this kind of other, almost otherworldly beauty. But the longer we stay with her, not unlike real life, the longer we stay with her, the more she becomes an actual person. Her relationship with the Count is still going to be odd, but it will make more sense over time. So Nargoli and ID, those were the first two things. Rue Maslay is further east from where the Count is. So if the Count's over somewhere near the Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe, if you went due east from the Arc de Triomphe, you'd go past Sacré-Cœur. On the north, you go past that to the next arrondissement over, and that's when you'd get to where our next family that the Count visits is living. You'll hear a reference to 2 newspapers. It's mentioned because there were only 4 left at the time. There had been a ton of different newspapers after the revolution, and now we boiled it down to 2. So that's the only reason that he's mentioning 2 newspapers. And the last one is the Noisette. This is a rose tree. It's a climbing rose. It has a really interesting history itself, but you can train it to get quite tall, 2.5 meters up pretty easily. It has really lovely flowers that are very tightly bound together. Instead of those big kind of open poofy roses, it's more of what the little buttonhole roses. And it was one of the first frost-hardy hybrids to have been made in the early 1800s. So it's mentioned because it's pretty new and pretty cool. And that is it. You know, the further we get away from the early exposition where we have to get the lay of the land and we have to understand our characters and where they came from and what's motivating them, the further we get away from that, the less contextual needs there are in a book like this. So here we go with chapters 49 and 50 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas.
Chapter 49. Haydée. It will be recollected that the new, or rather old, acquaintance of the Count of Monte Cristo, residing in the Rue Meslay, were no other than Maximilien, Julie, and Emmanuel. The very anticipation of delight to be enjoyed in his forthcoming visits, the bright, pure gleam of heavenly happiness it diffused over the almost deadly warfare in which he had voluntarily engaged, illumined his whole countenance with a look of ineffable joy and calmness, as immediately after Villefort's departure, his thoughts flew back to the cheering prospect before him of tasting at least a brief respite from the fierce and stormy passions of his mind. Even Ali, who had hastened to obey the Count's summons, went forth from his master's presence in charmed amazement at the unusual animation and pleasure depicted on features ordinarily so stern and cold, while, as though dreading to put to flight the agreeable ideas hovering over his patron's meditations, whatever they were, the faithful Nubian walked on tiptoe towards the door, holding his breath, lest its faintest sound should dissipate his master's happy reverie. It was noon, and Monte Cristo had set apart 1 hour to be passed in the apartments of Haydée, as though his oppressed spirit could not all at once admit the feeling of pure and unmixed joy, but required a gradual succession of calm and gentle emotions to prepare his mind to receive full and perfect happiness, in the same manner as ordinary natures demand to be inured by degrees to the reception of strong or violent sensations. The young Greek, as we have already said, occupied apartments wholly unconnected with those of the Count. The rooms had been fitted up in strict accordance with Oriental ideas. The floors were covered with the richest carpets Turkey could produce. The walls hung with brocaded silk of the most magnificent designs and texture, while around each chamber luxurious divans were placed, with piles of soft and yielding cushions, that needed only to be arranged at the pleasure or convenience of such as sought repose. Haydée and 3 French maids, and 1 who was a Greek, the first remained constantly in a small waiting-room, ready to obey the summons of a small golden bell, or to receive the orders of the Romaic slave who knew just enough French to be able to transmit her mistress's wishes to the 3 other waiting women. The latter had received most peremptory instructions from Monte Cristo to treat Haydée with all the deference they would observe to a queen. The young girl herself generally passed her time in the chamber at the farther end of her apartments. This was a sort of boudoir, circular, and lighted only from the roof, which consisted of rose-coloured glass. Haidee was reclining upon soft, downy cushions, covered with blue satin spotted with silver. Her head, supported by one of her exquisitely moulded arms, rested on the divan immediately behind her, while the other was employed in adjusting to her lips the coral tube of a rich narghile, through whose flexible pipe she drew the smoke fragrant by its passage through perfumed water. Her attitude, though perfectly natural for an Eastern woman, would, in a European, have been deemed too full of coquettish straining after effect. Her dress, which was that of the women of Epirus, consisted of a pair of white satin trousers, embroidered with pink roses, displaying feet so exquisitely formed and so delicately fair, that they might well have been taken from Parian marble, had not the eye been undeceived by their movements, as they constantly shifted in and out of a pair of little slippers with upturned toes, beautifully ornamented with gold and pearls. She wore a blue and white striped vest, with long open sleeves, trimmed with silver loops and buttons of pearls, and a sort of bodice which, closing only from the centre to the waist, exhibited the whole of the ivory throat and upper part of the bosom. It was fastened with 3 magnificent diamond clasps. The junction of the bodice and drawers was entirely concealed by one of the many-coloured scarfs, whose brilliant hues and rich silken fringe have rendered them so precious in the eyes of Parisian belles. Tilted on one side of her head, she had a small cap of gold-coloured silk, embroidered with pearls, while on the other a purple rose mingled its glowing colours with the luxuriant masses of her hair, of which the blackness was so intense that it was tinged with blue. The extreme beauty of the countenance, that shone forth in loveliness, that mocked the vain attempts of dress to augment it, was peculiarly and purely Grecian. There were the large, dark, melting eyes, the finely formed nose, the coral lips and pearly teeth that belonged to her race and country. And to complete the whole, Haidee was in the very springtide and fullness of youthful charms. She had not yet numbered more than 20 summers. Monte Cristo summoned the Greek attendant, and bade her inquire whether it would be agreeable to her mistress to receive his visit. Haidee's only reply was to direct her servant by a sign to withdraw the tapestried curtain that hung before the door of her boudoir, the framework of the opening thus made serving as a sort of border to the graceful tableau presented by the young girl's picturesque attitude and appearance. As Monte Cristo approached, she leaned upon the elbow of the arm that held the narghile, and extended to him her other hand, said, with a smile of captivating sweetness, in the sonorous language spoken by the women of Athens and Sparta, "Why demand permission ere you enter? Are you no longer my master, or have I ceased to be your slave?" Monte Cristo returned her smile. "Haidee," said he, "you well know." "Why do you address me so coldly, so distantly?" asked the young Greek. "Have I by any means displeased you? Oh, if so, punish me as you will, but do not speak to me in tones and manner so formal and constrained." "Haidee," replied the Count, "you know that you are now in France, and are free." "Free to do what?" asked the young girl. "Free to leave me." "Leave you? Why should I leave you?" "That is not for me to say, but we are now about to mix in society, to visit and be visited." "I don't wish to see anybody but you." "And should you see one whom you could prefer, I would not be so unjust." "I have never seen anyone I prefer to you, and I have never loved anyone but you and my father." "My poor child," replied Monte Cristo, "that is merely because your father and myself are the only men you have ever talked to." "I don't want anybody else to talk to me. My father said I was his joy. You style me your love, and both of you have called me my child." "Do you remember your father, Haidee?" The young Greek smiled. "He is here and here," said she, touching her eyes and her heart. "And where am I?" inquired Monte Cristo laughingly. "You," cried she with tones of thrilling tenderness, "you are everywhere." Monte Cristo took the delicate hand of the young girl in his, and was about to raise it to his lips when the simple child of nature hastily withdrew it and presented her cheek. "You now understand, Haydée," said the Count, "that from this moment you are absolutely free, that here you exercise unlimited away and are at liberty to lay aside or continue the costume of your country as it may suit your inclination. Within this mansion you are absolute mistress of your actions, and may go abroad or remain in your apartments as may seem most agreeable to you. A carriage awaits your orders, and Ali and Mirtho will accompany you wheresoever you desire to go. There is but one favour I could entreat of you." "Speak." "Guard carefully the secret of your birth. Make no allusion to the past, nor upon any occasion be induced to pronounce the names of your illustrious father or ill-fated mother." "I have already told you, my lord, that I shall see no one." "It is possible, Haydée, that so perfect a seclusion, though conformable with the habits and customs of the East, may not be practicable in Paris. Endeavour, then, to accustom yourself to our manner of living in these northern climes, as you did to those of Rome, Florence, Milan, and Madrid. It may be useful to you one of these days, whether you remain here or return to the East." The young girl raised her tearful eyes towards Monte Cristo, as she said with touching earnestness, "Whether we return to the East, you mean to say, my lord, do you not?" "My child," returned Monte Cristo, "you know full well that whenever we part, it will be no fault or wish of mine. The tree forsakes not the flower falls from the tree." "My lord," replied Haydée, "I never will leave you, for I am sure I could not exist without you." "My poor girl, in 10 years I shall be old, and you will be still young." "My father had a long white beard, but I loved him. He was 60 years old, but to me he was handsomer than all the fine youths I saw." "Then tell me, Haydée, do you believe you shall be able to accustom yourself to our present mode of life?" "Shall I see you?" "Every day." "Then what do you fear, my lord?" "You might find it dull." "No, my lord. In the morning I shall rejoice in the prospect of your coming, and in the evening dwell with delight on the happiness I have enjoyed in your presence. Then, too, when alone, I can call forth mighty pictures of the past, see vast horizons bounded only by the towering mountains of Pindus and Olympus. Oh, believe me, that when 3 great passions, such as sorrow, love, and gratitude, fill the heart, ennui can find no place." "You are a worthy daughter of Epirus, Haydée, and your charming and poetical ideas prove well your descent from that race of goddesses who claim your country as their birthplace. Depend on my care to see that your youth is not blighted or suffered to pass away in ungenial solitude, and of this be well assured, that if you love me as a father, I love you as a child." "You are wrong, my lord. The love I have for you is very different from the love I had for my father. My father died, but I did not die. If you were to die, I should die too." The Count, with a smile of profound tenderness, extended his hand, and she carried it to her lips. Monte Cristo, thus attuned to the interview he proposed to hold with Morrel and his family, departed murmuring, as he went, these lines of Pindar: "Youth is a flower of which love is the fruit. Happy is he who, after having watched its silent growth, is permitted to gather and call it his own." The carriage was prepared according to orders, and stepping lightly into it, the Count drove off at his usual rapid pace. End of chapter 49.
Chapter 50. The Morel Family. In a very few minutes the Count reached number 7 in the Rue Meslay. The house was of white stone, and in a small court before it were 2 small beds full of beautiful flowers. In the concierge that opened the gate the Count recognised Cocle, but as he had but one eye, and that eye had become somewhat dim in the course of 9 years, Cocle did not recognise the Count. The carriages that drove up to the door were compelled to turn, to avoid a fountain that played in a basin of rockwork, an ornament that had excited the jealousy of the whole quarter, and had gained for the place the appellation of the Little Versailles. It is needless to add that there were gold and silver fish in the basin. The house, with kitchens and cellars below, had above the ground floor 2 stories and attics, the whole of the property consisting of an immense workshop, 2 pavilions at the bottom of the garden, and the garden itself had been purchased by Emmanuel, who had seen at a glance that he could make of it a profitable speculation. He had received the house and half the garden, and building a wall between the garden and the workshops, had let them upon lease with the pavilions at the bottom of the garden, so that for a trifling sum he was as well lodged and as perfectly shut out from observation as the inhabitants of the finest mansion in the Faubourg Saint-Germain. The breakfast-room was finished in oak, the salon in mahogany, and the furnishings were of blue velvet. The bedroom was in citron wood and green damask. There was a study for Emmanuel, who never studied, and had a music-room for Julie, who never played. The whole of the second story was set apart for Maximilian. It was precisely similar to his sister's apartments, except that for the breakfast parlour he had a billiard-room where he received his friends. He was superintending the grooming of the horse, and smoking his cigar at the entrance of the garden, when the Count's carriage stopped at the gate. Cocle opened the gate, and Baptistin, springing from the box, inquired whether Monsieur and Madame Herbault and Monsieur Maximilien Morel would see His Excellency the Count of Monte Cristo. "The Count of Monte Cristo?" cried Morel, throwing away his cigar and hastening to the carriage. "I should think we should see him. Ah, 1,000 thanks, Count, for not having forgotten your promise." And the young officer shook the Count's hand so warmly that Monte Cristo could not be mistaken as to the sincerity of his joy, and he saw that he had been expected with impatience and was received with pleasure. "Come, come," said Maximilian, "I will serve as your guide. Such a man as you are ought not to be introduced by a servant. My sister is in the garden, plucking the dead roses. My brother is reading his 2 papers, the Presse and the Debat, within 6 steps of her. For wherever you see Madame Herbault, you have only to look within a circle of 4 yards, and you will find Monsieur Emmanuel, and reciprocally, as they say at a polytechnic school." At the sound of their steps, a young woman of 20 to 25, dressed in a silk morning gown and busily engaged in plucking the dead leaves off a noisette rose tree, raised her head. This was Julie, who had become, as the clerk of the house of Thomson and French had predicted, Madame Emmanuelle Herbault. She uttered a cry of surprise at the sight of a stranger, and Maximilian began to laugh. "Don't disturb yourself, Julie," said he. "The Count has only been 2 or 3 days in Paris, but he already knows what a fashionable woman of the Marais is, and if he does not, you will show him." "Ah, monsieur," returned Julie, "it is treason in my brother to bring you thus. But he never has any regard for his poor sister. Penelon, Penelon!" An old man who was digging busily at one of the beds stuck his spade in the earth and approached, cap in hand, striving to conceal a quid of tobacco he had just thrust into his cheek. A few locks of grey mingled with his hair, which was still thick and matted, while his bronzed features and determined glance well suited an old sailor who had braved the heat of the equator and the storms of the tropics. "I think you hailed me, Mademoiselle Julie," said he. Penelon had still preserved the habit of calling his master's daughter Mademoiselle Julie, and had never been able to change the name to Madame Herbeau.
"Penelon," replied Julie, "go and inform Monsieur Emmanuel of this gentleman's visit, and Maximilian will conduct him to the salon."
Then turning to Monte Cristo,
"I hope you will permit me to leave you for a few minutes," continued she, and without awaiting any reply, disappeared behind a clump of trees and escaped to the house by a lateral alley.
"I am very sorry to see," observed Monte Cristo to Morrel, "that I cause no small disturbance in your house."
"Look here," said Maximilian, laughing, "there is her husband changing his jacket for a coat. I assure you, you are well known in the Rue Meslay."
"Your family appears to be a very happy one," said the Count, as if speaking to himself.
"Oh, yes, I assure you, Count, they want nothing that can render them happy. They are young and cheerful. They are tenderly attached to each other, and with 25,000 francs a year, they fancy themselves as rich as Rothschild."
25,000 francs is not a large sum, however," replied Monte Cristo, with a tone so sweet and gentle that it went to Maximilian's heart like the voice of a father. "But they will not be content with that. Your brother-in-law is a barrister, a doctor."
"He was a merchant, monsieur, and had succeeded in the business of my poor father, Monsieur Morel, at his death. Left 500,000 francs, which were divided between my sister and myself, for we were his only children. Her husband, who, when he married her, had no other patrimony than his noble probity, his first-rate ability, and his spotless reputation, wished to possess as much as his wife. He laboured and toiled until he had amassed 250,000 francs. 6 years sufficed to achieve this object. Oh, I assure you, sir, it was a touching spectacle to see these young creatures destined by their talents for higher stations, toiling together, and through their unwillingness to change any of the customs of their paternal house, taking 6 years to accomplish what less scrupulous people would have effected in 2 or 3. Marseille resounded with their well-earned praises. At last, one day, Emmanuel came to his wife, who had just finished making up the accounts. "Julie," said he to her, "Coquelin has just given me the last rouleau of 100 francs. That completes the 250,000 francs we had fixed as the limits of our gains. Can you content yourself with the small fortune which we shall possess for the future? Listen to me. Our house transacts business to the amount of 1 million a year, from which we derive an income of 40,000 francs. We can dispose of the business, if we please, in an hour, for I have received a letter from Monsieur Delaunay, in which he offers to purchase the goodwill of the house, to unite with his own, for 300,000 francs. Advise me what I had better do." "Emmanuel," returned my sister, "the house of Morel can only be carried on by a Morel. Is it not worth 300,000 francs to save our father's name from the chances of evil fortune and failure?"
"I thought so," replied Manuel, "but I wished to have your advice. This is my counsel. Our accounts are made up and our bills paid. All we have to do is to stop the issue of any more and close our office." This was done instantly. It was 3 o'clock. At a 1:15, a merchant presented himself to insure 2 ships. "It was a clear profit of 15,000 francs, monsieur," said Emmanuel. "Have the goodness to address yourself to Monsieur Delaunay. We have quitted business." "How long?" inquired the astonished merchant. "A quarter of an hour," was the reply. "And this is the reason, monsieur,"
continued Maximilian, of my sister and brother-in-law having only 25,000 francs a year. Maximilian had scarcely finished his story, during which the Count's heart had swelled within him, when Emmanuel entered, wearing a hat and coat. He saluted the Count with the air of a man who is aware of the rank of his guest. Then, after having led Monte Cristo around the little garden, he returned to the house. A large vase of Japan porcelain, filled with flowers that loaded the air with their perfume, stood in the salon. Julie, suitably dressed and her hair arranged, she had accomplished this feat in less than 10 minutes, received the Count on his entrance. The songs of the birds were heard in an aviary hard by, and the branches of the laburnums and rose acacias formed an exquisite framework to the blue velvet curtains. Everything in this charming retreat, from the warble of the birds to the smile of the mistress, breathed tranquillity and repose. The Count had felt the influence of this happiness from the moment he entered the house, and he remained silent and pensive, forgetting that he was expected to renew the conversation, which had ceased after the first salutations had been exchanged. The silence became almost painful, when by a violent effort, tearing himself from his pleasing reverie, "Madame," said he at length, "I pray you to excuse my emotion, which must astonish you who are only accustomed to the happiness I meet here. But contentment is so new a sight to me, that I could never be weary of looking at yourself and your husband." "We are very happy, monsieur," replied Julie, "but we have also known unhappiness, and few have ever undergone more bitter sufferings than ourselves." The Count's features displayed an expression of the most intense curiosity. "Oh, all this is a family history, as Chateau Renaud told you the other day," observed Maximilian. "This humble picture would have but little interest for you, accustomed as you are to behold the pleasures and the misfortunes of the wealthy and industrious, but such as we are, we have experienced bitter sorrows. And God has poured balm into your wounds, as he does into those of all who are in affliction?" said Monte Cristo inquiringly. "Yes, Count," returned Julie, "we may indeed say he has, for he has done for us what he grants only to his chosen. He sent us one of his angels." The Count's cheeks became scarlet, and he coughed in order to have an excuse for putting his handkerchief to his mouth. "Those born to wealth, and to have the means of gratifying every wish," said Emmanuel, "know not what is the real happiness of life, just as those who have been tossed on the stormy waters of the ocean on a few frail planks can alone realize the blessings of fair weather." Monte Cristo rose, and without making any answer, for the tremulousness of his voice would have betrayed his emotion, walked up and down the apartment with a slow step. "Our magnificence makes you smile, Count," said Maximilian, who had followed him with his eyes. "No, no," returned Monte Cristo, pale as death, pressing one hand on his heart to still his throbbings, while with the other he pointed to a crystal cover beneath which a silken purse lay on a black velvet cushion. "I was wondering what could be the significance of this purse, with the paper at one end and the large diamond at the other." "Count," replied Maximilian with an air of gravity, "those are our most precious family treasures." "The stone seems very brilliant," answered the Count. "Oh, my brother does not allude to its value, although it has been estimated at 100,000 francs. He means that the articles contained in this purse are the relics of the angel I spoke of just now." "This I do not comprehend, and yet I may not ask for an explanation, madam," replied Monte Cristo, bowing. "Pardon me, I had no intention of committing an indiscretion." "Indiscretion? "Oh, you make us happy by giving us an excuse for expatiating on this subject. If we wanted to conceal the noble action that purse commemorates, we should not expose it thus to view. Oh, would we could relate it everywhere and to every one, so that the emotion of our unknown benefactor might reveal his presence." "Ah, really?" said Monte Cristo in a half-stifled voice. "Monsieur," returned Maximilian, raising the glass cover and respectfully kissing the silken purse, "this has touched the hand of a man who saved my father from suicide, us from ruin, and our name from shame and disgrace. A man by whose matchless benevolence we poor children doomed to want and wretchedness can at present hear every one envying our happy lot. This letter—" As he spoke, Maximilian drew a letter from the purse and gave it to the Count. "This letter was written by him the day that my father had taken a desperate resolution, and this diamond was given by the generous unknown to my sister as her dowry." Monte Cristo opened the letter and read it with an indescribable feeling of delight. It was the letter written, as our readers know, to Julie, and signed Sinbad the Sailor. "Unknown, you say, is the man who rendered you this service? Unknown to you?" "Yes, we have never had the happiness of pressing his hand," continued Maximilian. "We have supplicated heaven in vain to grant us this favour, but the whole affair has had a mysterious meaning that we cannot comprehend. We have been guided by an invisible hand, a hand as powerful as that of an enchanter." "Oh," cried Julie, "I have not lost all hope of some day kissing that hand, as I now kiss the purse which he has touched. 4 years ago, Penelon was at Trieste. Penelon, Count, is the old sailor you saw in the garden, and who, from quartermaster, has become gardener. Penelon, when he was at Trieste, saw on the quay an Englishman who was on the point of embarking on board a yacht, and he recognized him as the person who called on my father the 5th of June, 1829, and who wrote me this letter on the 5th of September. He felt convinced of his identity, but he did not venture to address him."
"An Englishman," said Monte Cristo, who grew uneasy at the attention with which Julie looked at him. "An Englishman, you say?" "Yes," replied Maximilian, "an Englishman who represented himself as the confidential clerk of the house of Thomson and French at Rome. It was this that made me start when you said the other day at Monsieur de Morcerf's that Messrs. Thomson and French were your bankers. That happened, as I told you, in 1829. For God's sake, tell me, did you know this Englishman?" "But you tell me also that the house of Thomson and French have constantly denied having rendered you this service." "Yes." "Then it is not probable that this Englishman may be someone who, grateful for a kindness your father had shown him, and which he himself had forgotten, has taken this method of requiting the obligation. Everything is possible in this affair, even a miracle." "What was his name?" asked Monte Cristo.
"He gave no other name," answered Julie, looking earnestly at the Count, "than that at the end of his letter, Sinbad the Sailor."
"Which is evidently not his real name, but a fictitious one." Then, noticing that Julie was struck with the sound of his voice, "Tell me," continued he, "was he not about my height, perhaps a little taller, with his chin imprisoned, as it were, in a high cravat, his coat closely buttoned up, and constantly taking out his pencil?"
"Oh, do you then know him?" cried Julie, whose eyes sparkled with joy.
"No," returned Monte Cristo, "I only guessed. I knew a Lord Wilmore, who was constantly doing actions of this kind."
"Without revealing himself?"
"He was an eccentric being,
and did not believe in the existence of gratitude.
"Oh, heaven!" exclaimed Julie, clasping her hands. "In what did he believe?"
"He did not credit it at the period which I knew him," said Monte Cristo, touched to the heart by the accents of Julie's voice. "But perhaps since then he has had proofs that gratitude does exist."
"And do you know this gentleman, monsieur?" inquired Emmanuel. "Oh, if you do know him," cried Julie, "can you tell us where he is, where we can find him? Maximilian, Emmanuel, if we do but discover him, he must believe in the gratitude of the heart."
Monte Cristo felt tears start into his eyes, and he again walked hastily up and down the room.
"In the name of heaven," said Maximilian, "if you know anything of him, tell us what it is."
"Alas!" cried Monte Cristo, striving to repress his emotion, "if Lord Wilmore was your unknown benefactor, I fear you will never see him again. I parted from him 2 years ago at Palermo, and he was then on the point of setting out for the most remote regions, so that I fear he will never return."
"Oh, monsieur, this is cruel of you," said Julie, much affected, and the young lady's eyes swam with tears.
"Madame," replied Monte Cristo gravely, and gazing earnestly on the 2 liquid pearls that trickled down Julie's cheeks, "had Lord Wilmore seen what I now see, he would become attached to life, for the tears you shed would reconcile him to mankind." And he held out his hand to Julie, who gave him hers, carried away by the look and accent of the Count.
"But," continued she, "Lord Wilmore had a family or friends. He must have known someone. Can we not—"
"Oh, it is useless to inquire," returned the Count. "Perhaps, after all, he was not the man you seek for. He was my friend. He had no secrets from me, and if this had been so he would have confided in me."
"And he told you nothing?"
"Not a word."
"Nothing that would lead you to suppose?"
"Nothing."
"And yet you speak of him at once."
"Ah, in such a case one supposes—" "Sister, sister," said Maximilian, coming to the Count's aid, "Monsieur is quite right. Recollect that our excellent father has often told us, 'It was no Englishman that thus saved us.'" Monte Cristo started. "What did your father tell you, Monsieur Morel?" said he eagerly. "My father thought that this action had been miraculously performed. He believed that a benefactor had arisen from the grave to save us. Oh, it was a touching superstition, monsieur, and although I did not myself believe it, I would not for the world have destroyed my father's faith. How often did he muse over it and pronounce the name of a dear friend, a friend lost to him forever, and on his deathbed, when the near approach of eternity seemed to have illumined his mind with supernatural light, this thought, which had until then been but a doubt, became a conviction, and his last words were, 'Maximilian, it was Edmond Dantès.'" At these words the Count's paleness, which had for some time been increasing, became alarming. He could not speak. He looked at his watch like a man who has forgotten the hour, said a few hurried words to Madame Herbault, and pressing the hands of Emmanuel and Maximilian, "Madame," said he, "I trust you will allow me to visit you occasionally. I value your friendship, and feel grateful to you for your welcome, for this is the first time for many years that I have thus yielded to my feelings." And he hastily quitted the apartment. "This Count of Monte Cristo is a strange man," said Emmanuel. "Yes," answered Maximilian, "but I feel sure he has an excellent heart, and that he likes us." "His voice went to my heart," observed Julie, "and 2 or 3 times I fancied that I had heard it before."
End of chapter 50.
All right, so we have ID and we have the fabulous family of Morel and Sons. And what a joy, right? Oh my gosh. Just getting to have Edmond see the purse there that's been kept under wraps and how much it affected him and all of the kind of fancy footwork that he had to do to get himself out of the hole that he found himself in by revealing too much, by having an emotional response to seeing that. And we finally got an answer to one of the questions that had been lingering for me, which was, what happens when this gets back to Thompson and French, which is a real money house? What happens when they get word of this guy forgiving loans or paying this thing off, or all of the fancy footwork and machinations that the Count had been up to in their name? And the answer is they denied any knowledge of it. So that was that. But it doesn't change anything for Maximilian because he knows the money showed up. So we finally got to see some closure on that, which is fun. And we heard the Count give ID some warning about not talking about the secret of her birth. We don't know what that is yet. We now know that there is a secret on top of everything else, and that for some reason her birth is something that cannot be divulged or should not be divulged in France because word travels fast among this limited small group of people. This upper class group it's not huge. And she's beautiful and she's now free, which is curious. He talks about people being his slave, both Ali and ID, and yet if she was his slave, why is he saying that she's free? Why would just being in France free her? Well, there was no slavery. The way that there was slavery in the United States, there was no slavery in France. So that's part of it. But beyond that, it sounds funky. There's something else going on here. So we're going to have to wait and see what the story is behind that one. And we're going to have to wait and see to understand a little bit more of her relationship with the Count, just in general. And that's, at first I thought he was a father figure because of the way they communicated and because of his age. But then she kind of makes it clear that she's not talking about loving him like daddy. So what's that about? There's a lot of big questions there, but we're going to have to wait a little bit longer to find out more about them. I will be sending out a newsletter update with the next couple of months' plans as far as CraftLit goes and when to expect episodes and crafty chats. That's going to be affected somewhat by my travel schedule because I am going to be traveling back to Brussels and also going out to do some trainings, I think in February as well. So that will have an effect on when I'm able to put episodes out. But I'm going to get that information out to you. If you're not on the newsletter, please go to craftlit.com and you'll see a link to it in the sidebar. Or if you go to the contact page, one of the things you can do there is sign up for the newsletter. Also, in this next newsletter that comes out, there will be links both in the show notes and in the next newsletter of gifts, little CraftLit gifts that you can give to people and support the show, which would be ever so awesome during this season. And if there's something that you would like that is not represented in the catalog of things, please let me know. There's always a way to get things made for you. So Heather at craftlit.com, and our call-in number, if you have a comment or question, is 206-350-1642. And have a great, great Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's, and we'll talk to you in 2017. Take care. I'll talk to you later. Bye. If you like getting free audiobooks with benefits every week, please consider supporting the show over at patreon.com/craftlit. There are rewards waiting for you beyond, the free podcast. You can also subscribe to our premium streaming audio by tapping the red lock when you are looking at the app or at the show notes at craftlit.libsyn.com/podcast. You can also sign up for a premium download subscription by following the links in the right-hand sidebar at craftlit.com. And if it's easier for you, you can always subscribe and review at iTunes and at Stitcher Radio. Like us on Facebook, support us at Patreon, and come with us on tour. For 9 years, CraftLit has been kept going by the support of you, the listener. And for that, I am truly grateful. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on